easiest and most probably interesting thing they could have done was take that off the streets. But no, you know what they did, Mr. Speaker? They saw this need and would go around to various doctors and give them a CD player with like music on it, like from the swing period. And it would, what it would do, it would basically tell or would give clearly the doctor the idea that with this is a great drug. My back was sore 3 months ago. I've started OxyContin, and it's fine. I can touch my toes again. I can jump, jive, and wail, as they say, Mr. Speaker. But that was wrong. That was so wrong because of the addictive qualities. Now, as this drug became more and more prevalent in the southern United States, in an area, the Appalachian area, Mr. Speaker, again, as I'm often to say in this House, an area of an economy that we both can attest to. It was an area where coal was king and the mining receded, and there's much poverty and there's much searching for a new economy. Cape Breton, Spring Hill, Appalachia, Mr. Speaker, is what I'm talking about. What they were finding with young people there, very early on, they found a way to what's referred to is they learned how to mainline this drug. And what they did, these are kids in high school, they would take the drug, put it in their mouth, wet it a bit to take the protective coating off it, lay it on a spoon, add some water, heat it, and then the drug would dissipate from its solid form to a completely liquid form. Withdraw the drug from the spoon, inject it, and bam, you have an instant high. Now, Mr. Speaker, there was other drugs through the process that were palliative drugs that were getting shifted into mainstream. But what they did, and these were responsible pharmaceutical companies, I would say, Mr. Speaker, where I would go as far as say that Purdue Pharma were not responsible. And what these companies would do is that they would compose and do a molecular structure on this pill that if you broke it down by heat and getting rid of the stomach coating, if you will, it would render the drug useless as an intravenous drug. Yet Purdue Pharma stood its ground and decided not to do this. And then, Mr. Speaker, like a tide, that pill ventured from the Appalachians to the southern sections of New England, to the northern sections of England, then over our borders. Now, Mr. Speaker, we have seen in and around my community and in the area that CBRM police have patrolled at least 25 to 30 deaths of young people that are directly related to the use of OxyContin. Now, you know, we've heard from members in the Liberal Party talking about, and rightfully so, the dangers of VLTs and what they do to life, Mr. Speaker. Well, you know, Mr. Speaker, we have sustainable facts about the use of OxyContin. OxyContin, in the wrong hands, Mr. Speaker, have killed primarily 25 of our very young citizens, Mr. Speaker. 25 young people that were in the prime of life that caught in that downward cycle of drug addiction. So we have to do something. Now, when it became of almost epidemic proportions in CBRM, as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, that there was leadership shown by such people as Dr. Tom Crawford in Glace Bay and Edgar McLeod, the police chief at CBRM, and the DHA got involved and the Department of Health got involved. But you know what the missing piece from the DHA, Mr. Speaker, is, not the DHA, but the Department of Health, is a workable, feasible prescription monitoring system that we need today, Mr. Speaker. If we're talking about items that are in our communities that are addictive and that are hurting families, well, Mr. Speaker, there can be no greater priority than a prescription monitoring system that will get this dastardly drug off the streets. And Mr. Speaker, it's not just this drug, it's other opiates that people are using. Because I had mentioned earlier, Mr. Speaker, we can do the monitoring, and we can do, and we've got great response from the docs in the community on this item, Mr. Speaker. But don't forget, once this addiction is established, there's clearly an underground market that will take effect. And so what we need, Mr. Speaker, is to confine this awful addiction to the ones that we have now and treat them properly. Now, there's been many discussions about, does methadone, for instance, work? Well, Mr. Speaker, my idea about methadone is we need it. We need it now. We need it in clinics that are monitored and that it's a go forward. Now, like, I'm not sure how our methadone clinics work, but I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, what I've heard about some of them make me skeptical. Realize in areas like Appalachia, when they decided that they would put in methadone clinics, what you would have to do is get tested before you got your methadone and get tested after. So you were never, ever allowed to fudge the numbers. So if you went in and in your pre-test, if you had opiates in your system, you would not get your methadone that day. Now, Mr. Speaker, stories coming back to me is saying that type of testing is not being done in the province. Well, Mr. Speaker, we need that type of testing. We do not need people who are double addicted. What we need is a system that will allow these people to progress and be part of our economic future. What we need are people that will help their communities grow. And indeed, what we need most of all is to stop our young people from dying from the end of a needle, Mr. Speaker. So we need, from the Department of Health, we need a system that's not only tracks, but is a first responder in a very urgent way. When we see people either double doctoring, as they say, and double doctoring is quite simple. It's quite simple. It's a matter of getting one prescription from another doctor and going to another, and that's what we need. So we need a prescription monitoring system with an urgency to not only flag the abuse of OxyContin, but other obituates that are on the street and that are causing our young people to become addicted. We need this for, the obvious reason is we don't want to have addicts on the street, but we need it so that these people can be cured, that it's a system that will help these people find their way through life. Most, these people, don't forget, these addicts didn't start off as people that said, wow, I'm going to take this OxyContin and I'm going to become addicted, and wow. They've taken it for various reasons. Some of them are that they were prescribed, as I mentioned earlier, as a chronic pain relief, which they were never, ever, ever, ever meant to treat. They're a palliative drug at best, but docs were told by Purdue Pharma, and Purdue Pharma would fly people in to areas like the Appalachians and set up these quasi type of town hall meetings and say, oh, no. This, we've got Joe over here who couldn't get a bed last week, but he's on OxyContin now, and he's getting out, and he and his wife have been to 4 dances in a row. It's a miracle drug. Well, Mr. Speaker, that miracle for a lot of people in my community has become a nightmare. It's a nightmare of such great urgencies that we've seen young people die. We've seen sisters and brothers have to grieve that loss, and indeed, we had mothers and fathers just beside themselves, Mr. Speaker, because of this awful addiction. An addiction, Mr. Speaker, that could have been nipped right away if we had to have a pharmaceutical company that was really upfront and proactive in saying, look, we know the corner of the market. This is a marvelous palliative drug. If they hadn't have gone beyond the step and encased it in something that it wasn't. And Mr. Speaker, what OxyContin is, never was intended to be, was a drug for chronic pain. It's a drug solely for palliative reasons. So, Mr. Speaker, with that in mind, we must be vigilant about this. We must be vigilant through a prescription monitoring system that works rapidly, that we can get out and get that message when we see this, nip it in the bud, and obviously we have to give the tools to law enforcement. When law enforcement sees the idea of as we do with they bring in other drugs, straight out illicit drugs, that they're able to monitor and infiltrate those peoples, those gangs, that we wipe it out there. So, Mr. Speaker, we need these things. So we need, basically, from this government, we need two departments to play severe leadership roles. We need justice to make sure that they supply our police officers, our investigators, with the tools to be able to infiltrate and nip this thing, cut it down. We need Department of Health to be there to make sure that a prescription monitoring system is implemented as fast as we can to save as many lives as we can, so nobody is fooling around with this, Mr. Speaker. This indeed is an epidemic that's been held back in Cape Breton by some very good-working, hard-working local people, Mr. Speaker. I would hope that we can count on the two good offices of this government, Justice and Health, to help us move forward and make sure that no more young lives are lost to that despicable drug. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the member of Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make a few comments with regards to this particular budget and some of the strengths and the weaknesses, obviously. Mr. Speaker, I've had an occasion, or a number of occasions, to sit and listen to the debates from members of all three caucuses with regards to this particular budget. And I've also had occasion to reflect on many of the points that are raised in this particular budget. And I just wanted to focus on some of the reasons why I think it would be advantageous for all members of this House to support this particular budget. Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, members from the island of Cape Breton have on numerous occasions indicated the importance of maintaining the Cape Breton Railway. And I was quite pleased to see in the budget that $1.5 million was allocated for the maintenance of this particular railroad, which is important for the economic and the social well-being of all of Cape Breton Island. Mr. Speaker, I was also pleased to see that there was $400,000 allocated to the school breakfast program. A program, by the way, Mr. Speaker, that members of the Liberal caucus, indeed the member for Halifax Citadel, knows is very near and dear to his heart, and that is the full growth and development of our young people for the future of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I was also very pleased to see that $2.5 million was allocated for low-income Nova Scotians to deal with the issue of diabetes. Extremely important, Mr. Speaker, to those who have been disadvantaged. Mr. Speaker, the previous speaker spoke about the problems with OxyContin in Cape Breton. $500,000 has been allocated to the operation of a methadone clinic in Cape Breton. Something, Mr. Speaker, that all members of this House was calling for, in particular the Liberal House critic. Mr. Speaker, as well, Mr. Speaker, there was an additional $500 allocated in the budget to expand the self-management attendant care program. Mr. Speaker, as well, $500,000, as well 25 new beds for long-term care in Cape Breton. Another positive, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard members from various positions in this House stand and rail the government about the lack of funding for road infrastructure in this province. In 1999, of which I was part of a government, 1993.
How much payment did you get?
There was four, only when I was in cabinet. I have to admit. So there is a strategic advantage, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when this government took over, $42.2 million was spent on capital road construction. This year, it'll be over $142 million. Mr. Speaker, I heard individual members comment about the lack of rural economic development. Well, Mr. Speaker, I am very saddened to state one of the primary reasons for the lack of rural economic development in rural Nova Scotia, in particular Cape Breton, rural Cape Breton, is because of a Liberal document that was adopted in the form of Bill 114, which was specifically designed to depopulate rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I will read you the essence of that particular document. Mr. Speaker, the key element of municipal reform package being proposed is provincial takeover of all aspects of social services. Many other desirable changes follow in order to make this step financially possible. Item number 7, one of the reasons. More efficient government by reducing the artificial distinctions between towns or cities and rural municipalities, reducing the incentive to build outside cities and towns. Essentially, Mr. Speaker, the government is saying that rural Nova Scotia was a liability to the province of Nova Scotia. And I think that's an absolute disgrace, Mr. Speaker, and that is the document that was used on the premise of doing what's been done here today. So you wonder why there's a lack of rural economic development in rural Nova Scotia. One only has to look in the mirror, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is an additional $300,000 for nursing recruitment in this province. That is another plus for long-term health care. $5.4 million to the Office of Health Promotion, bringing it to a total of $23.9 million. Mr. Speaker, this is good news. I don't care where you stand politically. This is nothing but good news for the people of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, an additional $360,000 to enable district health authorities to have additional public health nutritionists. Another need, requisition by the good member for Halifax or Citadel. He's so concerned about health and nutrition and the young people of Nova Scotia, I would think he'd want to support this endeavor by the government of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, an additional $17 million to go into the pharmacare program to keep the pharmacare premiums at the same level as last year. This is nothing but good news for the seniors of the province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, well, Mr. Speaker, it's not me that voted to depopulate the communities in Cape Breton West. It was the member for Cape Breton South. 28 out of 33 communities in Cape Breton West are rural, and they'll be pleased to see how the good member for Cape Breton South voted back in 1994. He's so ashamed of his actions, Mr. Speaker. He can only eat crow and more crow and more crow. If he had any sense of shame at all, Mr. Speaker, he would vote for the budget and stop embarrassing himself and his leader. Mr. Speaker, he was one of the members today that voted to embarrass his own leader by condemning the leader's position on education versus health care. He is one of the members in this House that voted to take issue with the very leader of the Liberal Party. And no, Mr. Speaker, we won't be intimidated by that bravado and that bullish behavior. He's not going to push anybody in Cape Breton West around. I can assure you that. They are very proud, Mr. Speaker. They saw the value of this budget last year, and they see the value this year, and they won't be bullied by that member again. Mr. Speaker, the whereas is quite simple. Whereas, contrary to Liberal leader Francis McKenzie's opinion, this budget is welcome news to most and is being seen as an opportunity to provide more programming and better services. And that member votes against his own leader. Are they using a gyroscope? Are they using a Ouija board? Or some kind of a willow rod to develop policy over there? Who knows? Who knows? One day they want $500 million for capital road construction, and then they want to reduce taxes. Where's the money going to come from? They want to get rid of gambling in the province. Mr. Speaker, $192 million. I don't see any member in this House saying that they fully endorse the abuse to the citizens of Nova Scotia by the use of gambling. But, Mr. Speaker, realism is realism. This is not a perfect world. So if you take 192 out of the gambling and you want another $500 million for capital road construction, where are you going to get it? You'll have to raise personal income tax and corporate income tax by at least 20%, right across the board. Mr. Speaker, what kind of math are they using over there? What kind of policy do they have? Well, Mr. Speaker, the economy in Cape Breton West is growing. I'm not so sure about Cape Breton South. Mr. Speaker, everything that member has touched has turned to ashes. Look at Sydney Steel, the subsidization. You cannot continue to waste taxpayers' money on that. If more money was spent on route number 4, the Louisbourg Highway, all the major infrastructure that would lead to the long-term sustainability of the economical and social structure of Cape Breton, would be further ahead than that type of draconian logic. Mr. Speaker? Well, Mr. Speaker, I will put my track record on the line any day in Cape Breton West against that member. Mr. Speaker, over in the Northside Industrial Park, farm engineering, 40 to 50 jobs now allocated through the assistance of Nova Scotia Business Inc., with the possibility of going up to 150 jobs. That is looking into the future. Right. Mr. Speaker, we cannot continue to dwell on the past. We cannot. It's been an albatross around our neck for so long, Mr. Speaker, and that type of draconian, drag-you-down logic is not going anywhere. Start thinking into the future for once in your life. Mr. Speaker, Federal Gypsum, Store of Forest Industries, over $22 million in provincial assistance for the long-term development. And Mr. Speaker, what do we get from that corner? Squawking about things that are so contradictory they're going nowheres. Mr. Speaker, today we have 428,000 people working in Nova Scotia, compared to a year ago, or in 1999, 383,500. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of positive initiatives here. It's easy to be a critic, but I'm telling you, Mr. Speaker, week after week here, I pointed out all the positive initiatives that have taken place in rural economic development in Cape Breton West, and the amount of money that was spent on road infrastructure, even in the member for Cape Breton South's riding, which he refuses to acknowledge. Tens of millions of dollars. Why not? It's much more better to feed on the negativity and the misfortunes of the people in Cape Breton than it is to stand up and do something positive. Mr. Speaker, it's about time to put that stuff to an end. Mr. Speaker, this is not about applause. This is about doing something good for the people you represent, and do something good, Mr. Speaker, for the people of Cape Breton West and all of industrial Cape Breton, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, we'll allow that honourable member to stand on his own 2 feet if the time allots. Mr. Speaker, the Credit Union Small Business Loan Guarantee Program, $8 million specifically targeted to small business, and more than $7 million has been provided to 100 businesses across rural Nova Scotia, resulting in the maintenance and creation of 700 jobs. Now, what's wrong with that, Mr. Speaker? What's wrong with that? Mr. Speaker, the Community Economic Development Investment Funds successfully closed offerings 8 of them, which resulted in over $3 million of capital being made available to rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, it wasn't myself, it wasn't any member of the Conservative caucus of the day, it wasn't any member of the NDP caucus, it was a member for Cape Breton South and some of his entourage that voted to depopulate rural Nova Scotia. That is the public record, Mr. Speaker. The record will show there was consistency in thought in what we said, not contradiction of thought in words, Mr. Speaker. And yes, the people of Cape Breton West will be very pleased to see what the honourable member has done to depopulate the 28 out of 33 communities. So, Mr. Speaker, that type of bravado and bullishness doesn't scare anybody in Cape Breton West. And that's what that honourable member loves to do, to try and be bullish and intimidate people and browbeat them. Mr. Speaker, this is a good budget. This is a good budget for the people of Nova Scotia, and it will do well. Mr. Speaker, the debt to GDP ratio has been reduced from 46.8% to 39.6%. That's positive news. Mr. Speaker, over $280 million of capital construction, Mr. Speaker, in this province that'll stimulate jobs in the economy. For schools, $38.1 million. Alterations additions, $17.6 million. Community colleges, $30.1 million. Buses, $4.7. Department of Justice, $2.5 million. Transportation, $14 million on buildings. Roads, highways, $142.2 million. Mr. Speaker, I can go on and on, but some people just don't want to hear good news. But the people of Nova Scotia want to hear it. Oh, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Motion is carried.
We'll just take a few moments until the minister and his staff settle in. Okay. I recognize the honourable member from the Eastern Shore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, I call for the estimates of community services.
Thank you very much. The time now is 2:27. Are there any additional comments before I recognize the honourable leader of the official opposition from the minister? No. Okay. I recognize the leader of the official opposition.
And my time?
You have 17 minutes remaining. That will take us to 44.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise today to join the debates, the estimates for the Minister of Community Services. And I have to say, I just listened to all the good news that the minister, or that the member from Cape Breton West was talking about, and I barely recognized what he had to say, Mr. Chairman, because certainly in the Department of Community Services there has been very little for people to be happy with. And in fact, unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, over the past number of years, this minister, and I'm not trying to be overly unkind, Mr. Speaker, but the reality is that this minister has made a shambles out of the Department of Community Services. His seeming unwillingness to understand that the people with whose charge he is placed demand from him and from his department their respect, Mr. Speaker. And that's what's been absolutely clear from the Department of Community Services over the past number of years that this minister has has been in the position that he's in. And you know, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, what is particularly kind of galling about the performance of the minister, and what is particularly disheartening and saddening to the people who watch his performance, is the way in which he treats them in a disrespectful and cavalier attitude. And he will do things, and we've all seen him do it in the House, Mr. Chairman. He pulls out press clippings from times gone by, and he refers to little bits of information which he thinks somehow, bizarrely, justifies the position that he takes. And while what is happening around the province and throughout this chamber, people simply sit across the way and shake their heads at the inability of the minister to understand that the people in the department for which he is given the responsibility to administer are out there every day simply trying to survive, trying to get by, trying to provide for their families. In many cases, Mr. Chairman, they are the people who are dealing with some of the most severe difficulties that we have in society. They're dealing with addictions. They are dealing with personal tragedy. They are dealing with disabilities, Mr. Speaker. They are dealing with mental health issues. And yet, the best that this minister can do is to reach into his folder and to pull out some yellowed old piece of newspaper from 2 or 3 years ago and quote back out of context the words of one of the other members in the House. I mean, it is a spectacle, Mr. Chairman, that just ought not to be tolerated by the government, because we need to look at what they've actually done. Just want to go through some of the things that they have done. The home repair program, Mr. Speaker, the provincial home repair program. This was to assist people with little or no means to repair their homes. They cut it by $1.5 million, Mr. Chairman. These is low-income individuals. The maintenance of children, Mr. Speaker, children in the care of the minister. This year, they will cut that program by $4.5 million, with no explanation of where they're going to get the money to do that, without seemingly a thought about what effect that's going to have on the staff that have to look after these children, the staff that are charged with the responsibility to see that they are appropriately placed and cared for. Mr. Speaker, they cut the non-profit housing program by $100,000. The non-profit housing program. They cut the employment support and income assistance staff by 18 full-time equivalents. Those are the staff that people go to on the entry point into community services. These are the people who come in to try to get assistance from the department. So what do? They cut the point of entry staff so that the waiting lists and the times are longer and longer and longer. And you know something, Mr. Chairman? Every single person in this chamber knows this is true, and you know why we know it's true? We know it's true because they are in our offices. That's where they come for help. That's where they come for assistance, because they can't get through the doors, the Department of Community Services, to get the help that they need. Some of the other things that they've done. They have frozen the return to work initiative at the 2003, 2004 levels. Right? This is people who are presently on community services, on social assistance, who are trying to get back to work. This fund was supposed to assist people by buying work boots and by assisting them in their struggle to get back to work. And they froze that program. They froze transition house operational funding at 2004, 2005 levels. Now, Mr. Speaker, the transition houses in this province, or Mr. Chairman rather, the transition houses provide an incredible service in this province, right from one end of the province to the other. They're there to assist women and children in need at the point where they find themselves in crisis. And they have been saying for a long time now that they are dramatically underfunded. Do they move to increase the funding to transition houses, the operational funding? No. Now there is, I'll say this, there is an additional amount of money in the budget, but that's only going to be allocated after their redesign is complete. Have they ever told anybody what their redesign is going to look like? No. It is a closely guarded secret, and we know that the predisposition of this government, in fact, is to cut the number of transition houses. That's what they said in one of their original budgets, and you may remember, as I do, Mr. Chairman, the way that the Minister of Finance wilted under the pressure, the day-to-day pressure of the members of the opposition in both parties who identified this as a travesty. They froze the rent supplements at 2004, 2005 levels. They froze residential placements under community supports for adults, Mr. Speaker. People with disabilities who are trying to get trying to get residential placements. Oftentimes, these are people who have elderly parents, people who need the support. And what did they do? They froze those, and those people are remaining in many times in situations where, although the people who are there, love them very much, they just don't have the capacity to provide them with the kind of supports that they need. And they income assistance, child care funding, frozen, Mr. Speaker. I just want to think about the way that this minister has dealt with that whole question of children and their kind of cavalier attitude. Because you should know, Mr. Speaker, that this department gave out more in bonuses to the deputy minister and to managers than any other department or agency in 2003 or 2004. 2003, 2004. And this is at the same time, Mr. Speaker, that they managed to increase the personal use allowance for disabled and mentally ill persons in care by $10. By $10, January of 2006. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia right now has had the highest increase in food bank use in Atlantic Canada. Shame. The highest increase in food bank use in Atlantic Canada, 46% increase since 1997, since essentially the time period that this minister has been in charge of his department. And 40% of those people using food banks are children, Mr. Speaker. It is the food banks that have become the growth industry in this province. Mr. Speaker, they increased the food allowance for those on community services by $4. By $4 in October of 2006. After pretty much a 10-year freeze. $4. Mr. Speaker, and what did the Minister of Community Services have to say about that? What he had to say, Mr. Speaker, was, well, people could eat a lot of pasta or some cheap vegetables if they were going to live on an allowance of $6.05 a day. Now, what kind of a response from the Minister of the Crown is that to people who are struggling every day to get by? Struggling every day to get by. It's a shameful display, Mr. Chairman. They continue to watch while daycares around the province close or face financial uncertainty. And yet the minister will not commit to a province-wide early childhood or child care plan with the new federal child care money. Something the minister could do but has refused to do. He moved 11 men out of the Nova Scotia Rehabilitation Centre to a temporary shelter at Sunrise Manor in 2001. A temporary shelter. Do you know where those people are today, Mr. Chairman? They are still in Sunrise Manor. They are still in that temporary facility, Mr. Speaker. He spent the province's share of the federal affordable housing money on rent supplements instead of actually creating more permanent housing for families and for people who need it. That's what they did. They could have actually built affordable housing, but instead they allowed the federal government to spend their money building the units, and they're taking their share of that money and providing rent supplements that are going to go into the pockets of the developers of the projects. And then after 10 years, when the program comes to the end, there's no guarantee that the developers even have to provide continued affordable housing for the very people that program was set up to benefit. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, it's just a terrible situation. After commenting publicly that there were enough shelter beds to meet demands, he was forced to fund Pendleton Place after being challenged by the Salvation Army and other groups, Mr. Speaker. There was the spectacle of the minister not understanding what the extent of the homelessness problem was. I mean, these are the people, after all, who he is charged with the responsibility of caring for. And Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we have raised over and over again is just to point out how out of touch the minister is. And I want to give one more quick example. People on social assistance who would like to take advantage of their academic abilities and to try to build a stronger province by becoming a nurse or an engineer, or by trying to advance their way from poverty into prosperity, are told by this government, by this minister, if you decide that that's what you want to do, we will take away the benefits to your families. And this minister says student loan program is an income-tested program. It's interest-free and goes on for 2 years beyond graduation. Shows he has no understanding at all of what the student loan program is actually all about. So, Mr. Speaker, it is with those words, with respect to the minister's role in the Department of Community Service, that I make the following motion. I move that the resolution be amended by reducing the amount provided for net program expenses of the Department of Community Services by $42,463.42, an amount equal to the minister's salary less $1. Mr. Speaker, I so move. Mr. Chairman, I so move.
Debate will continue on supply. I'll recognize the honourable member for Colchester, Muscatawba Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering if I could please be provided with a copy of that motion.
Point of order? Okay. Point of order. It's taken. The honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess there's a motion on the floor. I'm trying to get some clarification as to the chair's position. My understanding in the precedent of this House that was set, I recall back in 2000 on the education supply, motion was moved by the member from Halifax Needham. She moved it, and at that point in time, we had the vote. The vote was called, and the bells are rung, and the vote was held at that point. And that's my understanding of the precedent this House has set. That's the custom of this House.
Yes, the point of order, the honourable member for Colchester Muscatawba Valley.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, then I'm looking for some clarification because my experience around the legislature and committee is that we have an opportunity as members of the Legislative Assembly to speak to the motion that's put before us.
The honourable member for East Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Chair, I think it's important to note from the member from Colchester Muscatawba Valley that some motions are debatable, some are not debatable. It's you as chair have to decide whether A, it's debatable. I agree, it's the chair that has to decide. Is it debatable? And second of all, is the vote to be called immediately?
I'll recognize the Deputy Premier.
The honourable member, to some extent, is correct that you have to decide whether or not, to a certain extent, as to whether or not the motion is in order. But, Mr. Speaker, I would suggest to you that even if the motion is in order, other members who wish to debate the estimates of the honourable member should be permitted to do so.
I'll recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Point of order, I assume.
No, it isn't on a point of order. It's speaking on the estimate, so I will defer to my colleague on a point of order.
Point of order. I recognize the member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the difference is we have a motion on the floor. I understand the rights of the members to speak on supply debate if they wish, but that's on the actual debate. This is an amendment to the actual supply motion that was presented on community services. So we now have to, you as a chair have to decide if the motion is to be voted on immediately, and that would be my recommendation, because that one was done in 2000. We have a precedent in this House of a vote being handed immediately. It was not a debatable motion. That was the decision of the Deputy Speaker at the time, who was the chair. The member from Colchester Muscatawba Valley was that person in the chair at the time, and it was his decision at that point in time to say the precedent of this House is that we do not have a debate. We go immediately to a vote on that motion, which is an amendment. And I say, Mr. Chair, it is your job to make that decision right now.
I recognize the Honourable Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, if Mr. Chairman, if indeed the motion is in order, it should be, and the motion is to amend the estimates of the Department of Community Services, then that should be debated at the end.
Yes.
I beg your pardon. The vote should be called on that motion at the end of the debate on the estimates.
Right.
Thank you. Point of order for the honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I understand it, what the House Leader for the NDP is asking that we proceed immediately to a vote on this particular issue. And am I to understand from this House that as a House Leader for our party and as a member of this legislature, that I would not be allowed to debate a motion of such seriousness that if it's deemed to be a motion of confidence, that it would bring this House down? You know, I think the least I should be able to do is give the opinion of our party on that particular motion before the question is put to this House. Failing that, if we decide, or if this House decides by your ruling, Mr. Chairman, that this is not something that will come to a vote now, then I ask that our party be given the opportunity to proceed and question the estimates of the Minister of Community Services, and also during that time give some indication to how our party feels about this particular motion. But I'm awaiting a decision of the House as to whether or not this question is going to be called now. If it's determined it's called now, Mr. Chairman, then certainly we should have an opportunity to have our say on this issue before it comes to a vote.
Yes, it's my learned opinion that the debate will continue on the estimates. And I'll recognize the honourable member for... Point of order. Honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you. First of all, Mr. Chair, far be it from me to suggest how you should be doing the job, but I believe the government House Leader specifically suggested that we have to decide whether this motion is in order. I'm assuming that is what you're saying, A. B, if it is in order, I ask you to look at the precedent that was set only 5 years ago in this House with regard to the fact that the motion was no debate, it went to vote immediately. And I would suggest to you as chair that you better have some precedent to explain on the other side as to why that decision does not follow the precedent of this House in 2000.
The motion is in order, and it is debatable, and it will be debated at the end of the estimates, and a vote will be carried at the end of the estimates. The honourable member for point. At the end of the estimates, honourable member.
The entire, the tire estimates.
Point of order.
Point of order. The honourable member for Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, at the end of the estimates on community services, there's usually a motion of some sort put as to whether or not we agree to report back this estimate. So I need clarification as to whether the motion in your mind is to be done at the end of community services when we move that, or is it done at the end of the estimates in total?
The estimates, honourable member, are always left open. When we stand the estimates, we hold them in abeyance until the end, and that will be the case on this one as well. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure whether I understand exactly what's happening here in terms of the time frame for voting, but I do know this, Mr. Chairman. I do know this, that I would have, Mr. Chairman, I would have expected better from the NDP, you know, in regards to what the NDP is attempting to do here today. I've listened to what the leader of the NDP had to say, and Mr. Speaker, and I paid particular attention to his condemnation of the Minister of Community Services. And Mr. Speaker, I have to tell you that I agree with most everything he said in regards to that department and to its minister. However, what I don't agree on, Mr. Chairman, is the NDP trying to bring this House down today, without having to vote yea or nay on the budget next week. I think the NDP today, well, why else, Mr. Chairman, would the NDP move a motion of confidence here today? The finance minister says it's a motion of confidence. Point of order. I believe that I'm speaking in estimates here, and we're talking about the estimates of the Department of Community Services.
Point of order, the honourable member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to clarify that the member, for the House Leader for the Liberal Party, should understand that this was never a motion of confidence on our part, and I've heard no one say in this House that this is a motion of confidence. So, as far as I'm concerned, we've never moved a motion of confidence.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairman, that is not true.
Honourable member,
the House Leader for the government came to me within hearing distance of that member, and said that this is a confidence motion, and if it passes, pack your bags. That's what the House Leader said today, and he said the Finance Minister also considers it a motion of confidence here today.
Get up and say that.
The Honourable Deputy Premier.
On the point of order, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a vote in estimates in committee. And it may or may not be a vote of confidence. But however, Mr. Chairman, when the estimates are referred to the House, there will have to be a vote if indeed this amendment passes. There will have to be a vote on the Appropriations Act as amended. And Mr. Speaker, there is no possible way that is not a vote on a motion of confidence.
Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton South, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, again, Mr. Chairman, in debating the estimates and debating the, I guess we're debating the future of this minister, as we're debating the estimates. And I certainly agree with the NDP that I hope the future of that minister and this portfolio is not very far or long down the road. But I will say that, again, the NDP should have the courage of their convictions. If they don't like what this government is doing and want to bring down a minister, they can do it by voting against the budget. You know, they can send a signal to Nova Scotians that they're not satisfied with this government. And instead of trying to backdoor the demise of this government, they should tell Nova Scotians when the budget comes to a vote how they feel about that minister's budget, and if they feel that strongly about that minister resigning and his salary being reduced, then they would have no recourse but to vote against the budget. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not debating the incompetence of this minister, except to say that you have a unique quality of taking words right out of my mouth there. But anyway, I want to read something for the record on estimates here. And I entitled it "A Minister Out of Touch." Mr. Chairman, on April 22nd in this House, when we're debating education for people on assistance, this minister said to this House, it would be unfair to give single-parent student loans as well as social assistance. Continuing with statements of the minister, talking about university access for single mothers on assistance. Why don't we address the waiting list for affordable housing? Is not that a better way to address the problem? At some point in the estimates, I'm going to ask him to explain that statement. And here's one, Mr. Speaker, that people should be interested in hearing. This was on November 9th, 2004. And it talks about his concept of the issues. And I quote him, "Homeless means you don't have a place to stay." That's what the minister said. Homeless means you don't have a place to stay. I'd like them to explain that. During the debate on why people are homeless in this province, his answer was, because they don't have a place to stay. That is a piercing glance at the obvious, Mr. Minister and Mr. Chairman. And the other one, of course, that's now a famous statement is in response to the amount of money that the leader of the NDP talked about giving out to people on social assistance. When asked about the rates, the minister said they should eat more pasta. That's the contempt that this minister shows for those in this province that are less fortunate than those in this House. And in some cases, those in the gallery and those out on the street. That's the answer this minister gave. They should eat more pasta. A minister out of touch, Mr. Chairman, and I hope the Premier's listening to this, because if ever a government should be indicted for putting absolutely the wrong person in a portfolio in a cabinet, it's this government and this person in that job. Unless the government had an ulterior motive. If they didn't want to do anything for the people in this province that are in need, then they got the right person for the job. And I have to ask the Premier and other members of the Executive Council and other MLAs, is that what this government sent out to do? Is that what they wanted to do? You know, today in this particular department, Mr. Chairman, there are more bean counters than social workers. There are more bill collectors than people charged with the responsibility of helping people in this province. I can remember the days when the Department of Social Services was filled with caring people, social workers who wanted to do the right thing for people and had some leeway in how they dealt with people in trouble financially, or people in trouble with children's AIDS problems, or with homelessness, or with other things that we take for granted every day of the week. But none of this is happening in the Department of Social Services today. I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, what is happening is that some constituents of mine are getting calls regularly looking for money from the Department of Social Assistance, Community Services, a collection agency. They've turned over accounts from people who had overpayments, some as long as 10 to 15 years, are now turned over to collection agencies and to Service Nova Scotia, and by extension to collection agencies, to try to bleed these poor people for money, and hounding them by phoning them each and every day of the week, looking for $50 a month or $100 a month on overpayments. What are these overpayments, Mr. Chairman? Well, these overpayments are caused by, I'll give you an example, a person who is on community services benefits and eventually, through a long process, gets Canada Pension Plan benefits. And they make them retroactive to give the person a head start. They may make them retroactive 6 months to a year. But guess what happens, Mr. Speaker? Guess what happens? The government, the Community Services Department serves notice that they're going to claw back those retroactive awards and immediately tell the recipient they now have an overpayment and they need to pay it back to the government. So the recipient, who is getting $700 and something a month, I believe it's $780 is the maximum, around there, $780 a month, is getting harassed by this government for repayment of overpayment because of Canada Pension Benefits awards. Now, I'm sure that members of the government don't realize that's happening, some of them, because if they could, how could they live with themselves? How could they live with themselves if a person who gets $700 a month and is paying $500 a month for rent and at the same time has an overpayment because of a Canada Pension Plan award that may have added up to a few $1,000s, which they could pay some of the bills off that they owed? And the government is now hounding them for money. You know, Mr. Chairman, the other interesting issue here is that the Department of Community Services no longer gives discretion to frontline workers. We talked about the issue last week of the telephone. You know, some telephone, I think, is a necessity today, but not according to this government. There are certain things today that we take for granted that are not available to people on community services. And the reason they're not available is that this minister thinks that people are on community services benefits because of their own fault. Because of their own fault. They're the ones that are guilty in his eyes and should be treated as such. I've never seen, Mr. Chairman, I've never seen such a right-wing performance in all my life of a minister of community services, and I've seen a lot of ministers come and go. I've never seen, and I agree 100% with the leader of the NDP when he says this minister has to go. I don't exactly agree with the method they tried to do that today, because I still think there's a bigger picture brewing here. I think the NDP are looking for a way to get rid of this crowd without having to actually come clean and vote against the budget. You know, we're prepared to stand up next Monday night and vote our conscience, how our party thinks on this budget. And it won't be because that minister is incompetent or that the finance minister is incompetent or anybody else over there is incompetent. It'll be because we feel it's not a budget that's in the best interest of Nova Scotians. We won't try to disguise our feelings in that by trying to ram a motion through here today to defeat the government on reducing the salary of the appropriation of the Department of Community Services. I'd like to see the Premier do the right thing, Mr. Chairman, and the right thing to do here is to obviously agree that the direction the community services is heading in is the wrong direction. As a matter of fact, it's gone too far now. You know, and the minister, I'd like to see the Premier take this minister out of that portfolio and put somebody in there that really cares about people. Because the evidence is clear day in and day out in this House and day in and day out in his office that he's not the kind of person Nova Scotians should have in that portfolio. I don't have anything against the gentleman personally, but I think he has a feeling in this province that people are in trouble because of their own fault. It's nobody else's fault, it's their own fault. If they can't afford to eat properly, let them eat pizza or pasta or whatever it is. The situation has gotten so critical, Mr. Chairman, that we have the ridiculous spectacle of a federal-provincial agreement on housing being signed 2.5 years ago now, called for 1,500 homes in the province to be constructed. 1,500 homes. I think we may be up to a few hundred by now, most of them in the planning stage, some built, but some of them in the planning stage. And the agreement runs out in a couple of years. That's 50% dollars. The problem is that housing, affordable housing for people in Nova Scotia, are not a priority of this government. If they were a priority, the government would commit the 50-cent dollars of that $32 million project immediately so that we can get on with building affordable housing instead of looking after their friends that are operating slums throughout this province, some of them down in my area, forcing people into slum housing, paying $500, $600, $700 a month for rat traps. And that's what's happening all over the province because of that minister's inability to get on with that program, and also that minister's uncaring attitude towards those who need affordable housing. The housing authorities in this province, Mr. Chairman, need more money. They need more money to fix up their units. They should be given a mandate to develop more units instead of driving people to slum landlords. This program is not going to use up all the federal provincial money that's available because the clock is ticking on this, and we're going to have a situation where time is going to run out. You know, the minister sat in this House and never said a word when questioned as to why a Halifax regional councillor making $50,000 a year could access one of these homes that I believe was either a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom home under that program with no dependents. She had no dependents except, I believe, a cat. 2 cats, you know, but she got a unit. There are people, Mr. Minister, in my riding with 5 kids, single moms that can't get a housing unit. And you sat there in this House, Mr. Minister, and allowed that to happen. You sat there and did not even try to justify why your department allowed that HRM counselor. I don't blame the HRM counselor. If she's lucky enough to get a unit like that, fine. But surely to heavens there are more people deserving in this province than a Halifax regional councillor that's single to get a housing unit designed for affordable housing for families in this province. You know, I hope that I'm not the only one that thinks that that's a problem. And I hope that I'm not the only one that thinks that this government has lost its way when it comes to spending the federal and provincial monies that are made available for affordable housing in this province. We should have 1,500 units up and running right now, Mr. Minister, if you were doing your job. The federal government put the challenge on the table to you and you dropped the ball on this issue. I want to go back, Mr. Chairman, to the situation again with how this government is treating people in Nova Scotia. Not only do we have the spectacle, Mr. Chairman, of the Minister of Community Services allowing his department to harass people for repayments. I've written the Minister on a number of occasions regarding situations where people were living on $750 a month, and they've been harassed, and they've been harassed to the point where they can't sleep because operatives from Service Nova Scotia, a couple that I know in particular, and I'll be generous today, I won't mention their names, but they must be on a quota system because they're calling up and harassing people for money and telling them that if they don't get the money, now mind you, now remember, Mr. Minister, these are people living on $700 a month. You know, they're living on $700 a month. And they're asking them for $100 a month, or they're going to turn it over to a collection agency. And we've had this spectacle where Service Nova Scotia couldn't get anywhere with them on it. So now we get a collection agency out of Toronto calling these people and harassing them for money. These are people on social assistance. I wonder how many people in Toronto are calling big business in this province who are in default of their loans with the government and harassing them every day to pay those monies back. I wonder how many. Maybe the government can tell me that the big companies that we're giving millions to, they're getting harassed as well, are they? I don't think so. But I do know this, that people on minimal income in this province are getting harassed on a daily basis. Shame on that department, and shame on anybody who is working in that department who allows this to happen. It should not be. Those things, Mr. Minister, and I said to you before, those accounts should be written off. I believe in one letter I said to you, it's like trying to get blood from a stone. This poor lady has $750 a month coming in. She owes about $6,000 in back Canada pension plan payments, has no hope of ever paying it. And you guys are spending more on phone calls and letters to her than eventually the account is going to be worth, because you're not going to get any money out of it. You know you're not going to get any money out of it, yet you're making this woman's life miserable. Not only one person, but hundreds of people throughout this province are in that predicament. I've never, up until the last 5 or 6 years, heard of a case of community services. And you know, Mr. Minister, you can laugh all you want over there. You know, you can laugh all you want. And when you're finished laughing, I'll continue. That's why, Mr. Chairman, this minister should not be in that job. I'm talking about a poor person in this province making $700 a month being harassed, and that minister's laughing at me. That's what you got going on in this province. The uncaring attitude of this government when it comes to people less fortunate than we are. Now, Mr. Chairman, I want to move on a bit, and then maybe before my hour is up, I might allow the minister to his feet, because I hesitate to do that, because I'm tired of listening to this minister and his waxing eloquent about what all the wonderful things he's doing in community services, because I can't identify any yet. So it would be only a repeat. Pardon? Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to rise on an introduction, and I thank the honourable member for yielding the floor to me just for a moment. We have
Honourable Member for Lunenburg.
Thank you. We have with us in the gallery today, Mr. Chairman, a number of distinguished visitors from Lunenburg County who are with us here today to watch proceedings here at the legislature. These are members of the board and staff of the LaHave Manor Adult Residential Center located in Dayspring, Lunenburg County. And here with us today, and I hope I have everyone's name, is we have the chair of the board of directors, Maria DeVries. We have Councillors Arthur Young and Diane Tanner. We also have with us Helen Corkum, Ellen Burt, Stephen Black, Joanne Wenzel-Vardy, and Rick Hebb. And I'd like to ask members of the House to give them a warm welcome today as they watch the proceedings here. And it seems quite appropriate they're watching the proceedings of the Minister from Community Services. And thank the honourable member for yielding the time.
Thank you, and indeed welcome to all our visitors in the gallery today. The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And to the Justice Minister, I do want to apologize. I just read your note now. So I didn't want to wait that long.
All members to please direct any requests for introductions through the chair, please. Thank you. The honourable member for Cape Breton South, you have the floor.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'll just continue. There are some small options programs questions that I'd like to ask the minister as well, and maybe if his staff over there could jot them down, and maybe the minister could respond to them after. I'm sure he'd want some time to respond to what I've said up to date. However, I wish before I do that, I wish that the minister would actually, before the estimates are finished, agree with me that people on social assistance shouldn't be harassed for repayment of monies legitimately given to them through Canada Pension or Workers' Compensation Board. Because in that way, Mr. Chairman, what's happening here is that the government is telling these people that the amount of community services benefits they received was only a loan. It wasn't assistance, and you have to pay it back when you do get a retroactive payment, instead of allowing the person to climb out of the desperation they're in financially. Instead of allowing that to happen, they want to claw back all the money they got from community services. Community services should not be a money-making institution for the government. It should not be a bill collection institution for the government. And I say again, people on community services should be at least treated as fair as people running big business in this province who owe the government money. You know, that would be fine with me, but that doesn't seem to be happening. The most vulnerable among us are being preyed on by the current Department of Community Services, whether it's housing, whether it's affordable education. I introduced a bill here, Mr. Minister, you know that, asking for some consideration for people to attend a 4-year program at university and not have their benefits cut off. Do you know what's happening here, Mr. Chairman? If a person even applies for a student loan to go to a post-secondary institution, they're cut off community services the day they apply. Not the day they get it, the day they apply. You know, and so people are being discouraged from improving their education status because there's no incentive. Matter of fact, it's a disincentive to get them off of community services. I don't know who dreams up these programs or who are the architects of these draconian measures that are presently very much in evidence in that department. And I'm sure there are some social workers in that department that are very upset about the direction this department is going in. It's not a department that services people anymore. And I said before, the discretion for social workers is very limited now. There used to be a time in this department, Mr. Minister, when if a situation warranted it, the people involved in that case could react, and react positively, or set aside a bill or an obligation that that person owed the department for an overpayment because they simply couldn't pay it. Instead of that, they turn it over to a collection agency and harass the people until they're crying themselves to sleep every night. And that's happening. Because one woman told me if she doesn't pay it, she might have to go to jail. That's how afraid she was. You know, in this day and age, in the year 2005, somebody making $8,500 a year is told they have to pay a bill back to community services. That's terrible, Mr. Chairman. That is absolutely the most draconian measure I've seen yet coming out of that department. There has to be a change. There has to be a change. You know, I think we have to go back to the days when social workers ran that department. Mr. Minister, I think we have to go back to those days. You know, it'd be interesting to find out what the ratio between bean counters and social workers are in the Department of Community Services today. Social workers, I believe, have a role to play here that I believe is being diminished by this department. I know that at one time, a person on community services was a person that they knew by name. And they knew the financial circumstances of that person, and they could react to the individual person and their circumstances. Today, it's all on the computer. They're all numbers. They roll it out. And if you don't fit, if you can't fit the glove, then that's too bad. If you get an overpayment because of Canada pension benefits paid to you, then you have to pay that loan back. When did providing community services so people could live, eat, pay rent, send their children to school, become a loan? I thought in our just society that we looked after people that were less fortunate than ourselves, that we actually tried to improve the lives of people that were less fortunate than ourselves, that we actually would think that it might be a good idea to send a single mom to university who has children and look after those children in daycare and give her sufficient funds while she pursues her degree, and the eventuality would be that she gets off of the public assistance system and becomes a taxpayer and becomes a citizen who is contributing to our society, raising her children in a better standard of living. That's not happening. For some reason, the government, you know what it's all about? It's all about money. The government doesn't feel they should enter into a 4-year program because it costs twice as much as a 2-year program. But they've never adequately explained to me why they would allow somebody to go to a 2-year program and access some assistance when they can't go to a post-secondary 4-year program. Also, when a single mother with 4 or 5 children has to access a student loan, for a 4-year program. She's cut off social assistance. She has to use the part of that student loan to live while she's going to school. And then, Mr. Chairman, when she gets out of university, she owes a student loan of $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Is that fair? The government hasn't addressed that. I'm saying to you, Mr. Chairman, that this government has not paid any attention to the housing needs of people in need in this province. They haven't paid any attention to the educational needs of people in this province. They haven't addressed the horrendous problem of student loan debt in this province, which keeps going up and up. And people who are fortunate enough to get a student loan will never have the opportunity to see themselves out of debt. Something has to be done about that. And I believe the Minister of Community Services has dropped the ball on all those issues. Because, Mr. Chairman, the Minister of Community Services doesn't see the problem. He says it would be unfair to give single parent student loans as well as social assistance. Hello? You know, what would be unfair about that? He says, talking about university access, his answer is, why don't we address the waiting list for affordable housing? Well, you're not doing that either. And you're not giving, that was a cop-out, because not only are you not giving assistance to single mothers on assistance, you're not doing anything about the affordable housing issue. And of course, homelessness means that people don't have a place to stay. That's what you said, Mr. Minister. What a piercing glance at the obvious. The reason they're homeless is they don't have a place to stay. I would have suspected that you might have tried to address it this way. We have homeless people in this province, and we're going to try to solve that problem by giving them a place to stay. And of course, the rates that the leader of the NDP talked about, the rates, $4 increase or an $8 increase or something, and his answer to that was, well, if they can't get by on that, let them eat more pasta. Quite an answer from the Minister of Community Services. You know, it came down to, last winter, it came down to a decision, people on community services that I know, they either didn't eat or they froze, one or the other, departments. We have to have more affordable housing, Mr. Minister, in a hurry in this province. We have to address the needs of those people that are less fortunate than us. And there's one particular group that I think that I've written you about more than anybody, and that's the single mother with dependent children. Single moms with dependent children who are struggling. Another group is the disabled who are struggling in this province. And let me refer back again to the collusion between Service Nova Scotia and the community services, and try to extract monies from people who can't afford to pay monies to community services. They've turned over Service Nova Scotia. I thought was a department that would service the needs of Nova Scotia, not a bill collection agency. And there's a couple of people from that minister's department who are harassing people on a regular basis. And I think that, if nothing else, that has to stop. At least I can say that the Minister of Community Services, his part in this charade is just to turn the names over to them. Service Nova Scotia are the ones that are doing the harassing here, for the most part. Now, you know, the Premier had talked earlier about this government falling perhaps by accident. You know, and it won't be an accident that this government's going to fall. The reason is it's going to be because of people in Nova Scotia getting fed up with what's been happening here. When this government can boast of a budget surplus this year, but yet not look after people on community services adequately. That's one. Two, the government of Nova Scotia has not paid any attention to the federal-provincial agreements on housing, because if they had, there would be announcements of up to 1,500 housing units under construction or completed by now, 2.5 years after the agreement was made. We were nowhere near that. We're light years away from those numbers, because this government doesn't consider their 50-cent dollars in this program to be a priority. You know, there are units in Cape Breton that are falling down. Yet, There are a number of people well known to this government who are operating slums in our area and other areas, and they're filled with people on community services because those people can't get into a public housing unit and have nowhere else to go. So, Mr. Chairman, it's not going to be by accident or a motion that was put today by the NDP to avoid the budget issue. It's going to be because Nova Scotians are being picked off by this government and are eventually going to be adversaries of this government because we see it happening more and more each day. When the government tries to disguise the fact they're responsible, yet the debt of this province keeps going up and up, even though the Premier said it wouldn't go up. But it is going up. But while the debt is going up, they're bragging about a surplus. Well, if they're bragging about a surplus, Mr. Minister, how much money are you getting out of that surplus to help those in need in this province? Part of the surplus, or the majority of it, came forward as a result of $50 million in exploration permits being turned back to the province because the oil and gas industry have abandoned ship. They've taken off out of here. So that was put on the surplus. Monies that were returned in exploration permits. Nobody highlighted that when they talked about the surplus. Finance minister didn't get up and say, because all these people left the province and returned their permits, we've got all this money. You know? Nobody said anything about the $20 million the government put into Cisco this year, even though the place is closed. You know? We heard a member earlier here today talk about the waste of Cisco. Well, at least we kept 800 people working. The government put $20 million in this year, and the place is closed to make their bottom line look good. The place is closed. Would the member from Cape Breton West, rather that the 800 people that were working there before, would he suggest that today is a better situation where the government is spending millions on their friends, the contractors, and putting $20 million in there this year to make the bottom line of Cisco look good? That's his problem. If he can justify that to the people that are steel workers in his area, that's fine. Mr. Minister, I had a call from a local organization with respect to the budgeting process for small option homes. And I want to get into that for a few moments. I indicated to them that I would be asking a few questions on their behalf and questions that we're concerned about and interested in ourselves. And one of those questions is, I believe that as I ask these questions, you can answer them or you can wait till I finish asking all of them. That's up to you. I'll allow you the opportunity to ask them one by one or all of them. But first question they want to know, and I want to know, is how many clients are presently receiving care in small option facilities under the Services for Persons with Disabled program? Maybe you might want to answer that question, Mr. Minister.
Thank you. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And with regards to the last question, there's approximately 3,000 in total in the Services for People with Disabilities program, and I thank you for the chance for letting me to get to my feet, and I'll address some of your other concerns and the concerns of the Leader of the Opposition. First of all, there was an interesting performance put on here by the Leader of the Opposition to start off the estimates today. And I would suggest to that honourable member that when you get up here and you spend about 15 minutes attacking the character of a person in this House without backing it up with substance, it probably says something about either the operation of the department or your understanding of the operation of the department. And I really appreciate good debate in this House. And there has been some good debate in this House. And as I made reference to earlier in question period with regards to the member from Dartmouth North, some of the debate that he brought forward in last year's estimates, in fact, made a difference in the way that we evaluated affordable housing projects as to whether we would approve them. So I really appreciate the chance to get up and talk of things of substance, and I think that Nova Scotians generally would prefer us to speak of things in substance here as opposed to personal attacks on character. However, it's not my time when an opposition member gets up. If the Leader of the Opposition feels that's an appropriate way to use his time, then he is certainly able to do so. The Leader of the Opposition also made reference to my habit of tabling information, newspaper articles, quoting people in the past, and I've got one here that I would like to pass in, and it's actually, it deals with that member when he was running to be the leader of the NDP party, and it's interesting, in his 6 points that he spoke about, none of them had anything to do with the clients served by the Department of Community Services, yet today he gets up here and he's made quite a number of suggestions about this government and, in fact, my own performance as minister. So I would suggest that back on March the 7th, 2002, none of the things that we have done in the Department of Community Services, such as increasing the basic personal allowance, the affordable housing programs, the Community Supports for Adults Renewal Initiative and the new programs that have come out of that, none of that was even on his radar screen until it was done by this government. So I would like to table this, and I also want to put on the record that there has probably been no leader of the NDP that has done less for the people served by the Department of Community Services by virtue of making it a priority in that party's platform. In the election platform last time, it was non-existent. It's not lost on the advocacy groups. They do not appreciate it, and they have shared that with me. So while he may have a lot of interesting things to say about the Department of Community Services, our government, and indeed me personally, I think he should look at his own track record. He speaks about cuts, and the official opposition critic yesterday got up and spoke of that, and I pointed out to her that, in fact, last year the Department of Community Services came out with a $28 million increase in its net budget, which was the second largest increase for any of the departments after health. And this year, at $22 million in net increase, it is the third largest. Those are substantial increases. So when he speaks of cuts, perhaps he should go back to the estimate book, and this is the estimates, and I think it would help guide his criticism and perhaps direct him in a more constructive direction. And again, he makes a few allegations that were, quite frankly, bewildering my staff here, who spend their time tracking the performance within the department, because, to be perfectly blunt, they didn't know what he was talking about. So I just want to get on the record that there was not a great deal of credibility in some of the allegations that the Leader of the Opposition was making about the department. Specifically, there's two that I'd like to touch on, and it's with regards to affordable housing. He was talking about freezing in the rent supplement, which is in fact a very effective and efficient way of providing affordable housing to low-income Nova Scotians, those in greatest need. And it is shown on the estimates as $2.6 million, and that's been steady. But what he's missing is that the increases under the affordable housing program, which is where the province is making some of its contribution as our 50% share, a lot of those rent subs are in there, and year over year, the increase is $7.55 million to $10.3 million, which most people would agree is a fairly significant increase, somewhere in the vicinity of 30%. And you can see that on 4.4 of the estimates. So again, it's good to always bring a little bit of substance to these debates. He also made mention of bricks and mortar, and as indeed did the member from Cape Breton South, as not being the way that we have chosen to invest provincial monies in the affordable housing program. And in actual fact, the member from Halifax Bedford Basin was also making reference to her disapproval. Okay. Halifax Clayton Park. Thank you, Honourable Member. I stand corrected as to the new name of the constituency. And in essence, they were both advocating for bricks and mortar as the way to go. That means building new public housing units. And actually, Mr. Chairman, it's interesting because I've got an article here from the C.D. Howe Institute that talks about this, and it says that $1 of spending on social housing produces about 37 cents a housing. That means if you invest in bricks and mortar, you get about a 37% return over the long run, while the same dollar would have produced 85 to 90 cents of housing with allowances, in other words, rent supplements. So this is 2.5 times more efficient, and in fact, the provincial territorial housing ministers were lobbying our federal counterpart to consider this, and I'm pleased to say that after some persistence on our part, the federal government is also now recognizing that that is possibly a better way of delivering affordable housing than the traditional bricks and mortar. And I would be happy to also table this. One of the quotes that the opposition parties have used with reference to my empathy for people that are on social assistance or low income is with reference to a comment that I made about a year ago when we finally increased the basic personal allowance. That's the amount that people are expected to live on for food and clothing and their basic personal effects. It had been frozen for a very long time, and through no initiative or encouragement from the opposition, we increased it from $180 a month, which is not enough, to $184, and this year it's gone to $190. And I would expect that as long as I'm minister, it will continue to go up every year, and as long as John Hamm is premier. So the suggestion is that this comment about eating pasta was somehow or other perhaps not respectful of our clients. And in actual fact, Mr. Chairman, the comments were attributed to my own family, because about 15 years ago, I had a business that was growing rapidly. It depended on the coast, the fishery, basically, because I distributed with eventually it was 4 staff, music to smaller communities throughout Atlantic Canada. We did mail order. I went around, I solicited accounts, and when the collapse of the fishery came, I was loath to react promptly and lay off staff, which in retrospect was probably a mistake. But I tried to hold on to the staff, and things were pretty tight. We just had our 5th child. My wife was either on maternity leave or back to school. And we learned about things like having powdered milk and mixing it with whole milk. And we ate pasta. And in fact, when a friend of ours had some tomatoes that were not suitable for harvest in the field because they weren't quite as aesthetically pleasing, we were quite pleased to go out and mix that in with the pasta. And we probably had pasta every second night. And you know, we did just fine, Mr. Chair. We were a close-knit family. In the evenings we found things to do, like go down and play ball with my children. In the summertime and in the wintertime, perhaps we go to the local skating rink outdoors, and it made us stronger. But the reference to pasta, when you mock me about my comments of pasta, you are mocking a difficult time that my family went through financially. And I would allow Nova Scotians to judge whether that's the sort of behavior they want from their elected representatives, making fun of people that have made difficult choices in order to support their family. I was in that position, and one of the ways that we addressed it was to eat pasta. Another way was that my children couldn't drink all the liquid milk that they'd like to drink. We had to mix it with powdered milk. And obviously there were other steps that had to be taken. So while these opposition members may think that it's funny that I make that statement, I'm quite proud of the way that we came through this, and we would do it again. That may possibly temper their remarks in the future, but I leave that up to them. Community services, the member from Cape Breton South, I want to say that the member from Cape Breton South does care about his constituents. I know that because he's a former social worker, and he writes me, and he sticks up for his constituents, and sometimes we're able to help him, sometimes we're not able to help him. There are other members in the room from all sides of the House that care about their constituents. It's pointed out to me, but I'm just acknowledging that the member from Cape Breton South, who made some comments about our practices about trying to address overpayments. Overpayments that are often caused because people have a disability, they have no other means of support. Unfortunately, they may not have any form of disability insurance, and after their employment insurance runs out, or in the case of a proprietor, they may not even have an employment insurance, they're without. And unless they get some support from somebody, there's no way they're going to be able to care for their families or themselves, even if they're a single person. So this is where the Department of Community Services steps in and will make advances against the possibility that they may be approved for Canada Pension Plan disability pension. We do that in good faith. If Canada Pension Plan disability pension turns them down, they owe us nothing for the advance. However, if they do pay them, and it would be retroactive to when they first applied for CPP, of course we expect them to pay back their advance. And we do this based on a schedule of their ability to pay. If they are no longer a client of the Department of Community Services, they go to Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, but as the member from Cape Breton South, I think, would acknowledge that if they still do not have the means to make regular payments, that is certainly taken into consideration with their payment schedule. I would also like to point out that caseworkers are the front line, and they are the backbone of the employment support and income assistance system. Whether it's an employment support worker who's trying to help clients overcome barriers to employment so they can start a career or possibly obtain that degree that they need to get a job, or the diploma. Maybe it's high school. They have discretion, as do the income assistance caseworkers. And when it comes to our special needs, I think if anybody was to look at them, that's the ones which is really a measure of their discretion. There's no question that those caseworkers are in a position within policy to help those most vulnerable Nova Scotians that may be clients of the Department of Community Services. Another interesting thing that I'm going to speak to before I sit down is I sort of get a charge out of the member from Cape Breton South. He's a pretty good performer here in the House, and I say that out of greatest respect, because we have a job to do here, and his job is to get up and to make his points, and sometimes I think he may embellish them a little bit, but that happens in the House. But he made reference to the affordable housing program, which is interesting to me because as the critic of the Department of Community Services, which includes housing, last year he wrote a letter to the editor that was extremely critical of the fact we were not getting the job done. He made quite a number of suggestions in his letter. He used some numbers about how far we'd got in implementing the program. And this was after the fall setting of the legislature. And normally I don't respond to letters from opposition members, but in this case I did respond to the two newspapers in the province that published his letter, including his own, and they both published mine. And I pointed out that in the fall setting of the legislature, that member, in fact all members of this House, were given an update on where we were with the affordable housing program, how we were using the rent subsidy approach, and how many units were built, how much of a commitment had been made from the federal provincial dollars, and other dollars that we were able to leverage as a result of this program. And it was interesting that the numbers that he was claiming after been giving this information were so far off the actual numbers. He was given the actual numbers, and what I would say is that while he writes a pretty good letter, if he did a little research by reading what was actually given to him, he'd write an even better letter. So he also made reference here today about this, the affordable housing program, making reference to the fact that it's a $32 million program. Again, it's good to see that the member from Cape Breton South is interested in affordable housing, and I think every member in this chamber shares that concern, and certainly my staff at the Department of Community Services. I have good news for the member. The phase 1 of the program was actually 37.26 million, and so it's more than the 32 million he spoke of here, and we've since signed a phase 2, which adds another 18-odd million to it. So we're somewhere up in the area of $56 million, and if the member would like to know the exact amount, I'd be happy to provide that to him. So that should be good news from the member from Cape Breton South. Appreciate his interest in affordable housing, and what he has learned here today, that in fact we've almost got double the commitment to affordable housing as what he suggested in the House. So I'm sure that he'll be very pleased with that information, and I hope that the debate goes forward in a constructive fashion, and that we can now focus on matters of substance in the department. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I recognize the member for Richmond, and there's 5 minutes remaining.
5 minutes. Well, isn't that lots of time? Hopefully my questions will require much briefer answers from the minister. That was a bit of a long one. Anyways, apparently the minister wishes to remain in estimates for an extended period of time with those kind of answers. But let me be briefer, Mr. Chair. I've had the opportunity to write to the minister on behalf of constituents, and I specifically want to thank the deputy minister, who has been certainly extremely helpful on a number of very sensitive matters, and I was extremely impressed with how they were dealt with. And I've always spoken well of Wayne Bona, the supervisor of St. Peter's Office, Community Services, and his staff, who do their best to work with a limited budget. One of the issues that I want to raise in my short amount of time is on the issue of what's commonly known as grants for home improvements. This is certainly an issue with seniors who are trying to remain in their homes, for low-income families, and it's to the point that funding has been cut so much in this that what's happened is that they're only making money available for emergency situations. Even worse, what's happened with the reduction of funding, the cap for income has continually lowered. Not lowered in a good way, lowered in the sense that if you make any more than, I think it's between $19,000 and $20,000 as a couple, you're considered over income for a housing grant. Now, Mr. Chair, if we are going to allow Nova Scotia communities to remain viable, for seniors to remain in their homes, we have to address that cap. So I believe there's been some announcements between the federal government and provincial government regarding this program. My question to the minister is, could he indicate, is your department moving on that income cap? The idea being is that cap is going to go up, meaning that more families are able to qualify rather than the current cap, which means anything over $19,000, $20,000, you're over income. And I don't think anyone in this province or anyone in this House believes that someone making more than $20,000 is well off or should be considered over income for any government program. So my question is to the minister, could he briefly tell us, is there going to be a move on that cap that is currently in place?
Thank you, the Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, I want to thank the member opposite, first of all, for your comments about my staff, and that's very important to me, and they do hear the comments here in the chamber, and it does make a difference, and I appreciate the positive approach that you have brought to this debate, Honourable Member. And I would also like to add that you are diligent in pursuing the interests of your constituents, and I find you to be most reasonable in your approach. So it's a little nonpartisan comment about the way that you conduct yourself, and it probably has something to do with the reason why you've won 3 elections. To answer your question, Mr. Chairman, I think that some of the other members in the room take some amusement by my comments about the dedication of the member from Richmond, but I stand by my comments and enjoy the jostling that he's getting as a result of them. To answer your question, we are concerned about increasing the income thresholds for people that are applying for, it's called SCAP, the Seniors Capital Assistance Program, and the Provincial Housing Emergency Repair Program, the former being for seniors, the latter being for families. It is something that we do want to increase the thresholds as more people can access them, but there has been no cuts. That we've not further restricted the access. Your point, I think, Honourable Member, is that we should be increasing them, and it is our intention to do so.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I guess what I'm saying is that I'm not saying there's cuts, but there's been a lack of funding in that particular program. And when there's lack of funding in anything, we know what immediately happens is that the qualification for that changes because of the fact there is a lack of funding. And that's not just in this program. We've seen it in other government programs. That's the reality. When the funding goes down, the criteria changes for who can qualify as a result. So I guess my question again to the Minister, in light of the funding that's in place, some of the new federal dollars coming in, can we expect that the current limit of, I believe it's around $20,000 to qualify for one of these grants,
Order.
Will that be changed?
Order. Time has expired. I'll allow a quick answer.
Honourable Member, what you're asking about is funding for SCAP FERP, and actually one of the ways that we try to address this was making that a priority. Last year with the strategic infrastructure monies in November, we put an extra $2.7 million in there, and we are trying to lower the waiting list to address those outstanding legitimate applicants. And you're quite right, when you increase the caps, you let more people in, it's going to put more pressure on the program.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. I'll recognize the Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid. And before you begin, I wonder if you would allow for an introduction. Yes. Recognize the Honourable Member for Dartmouth South and an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to make 2 introductions. In the West Gallery, we have Yvonne Atwell, who's former member of this Legislative Assembly for Preston. And we also have Mary Rothman, who's the Executive Director for the Nova Scotia Association for Community Living. And I ask my colleagues in Committee of the Whole to give them a warm welcome.
Hear, hear. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to stand today and make some comments about, especially around the housing issues in our province. As the housing critic for our party, it's been an interesting 18, 19 months since my election and being given the portfolio of housing in this province, because housing in Nova Scotia and the need for affordable housing has been on the increase for many years now. It's my understanding that the federal government got out of the affordable housing initiatives many years ago, downloaded it onto the province, and then realized, I think, their error in their ways and the need to address the affordable housing needs across the country. This isn't something that's just a problem in Nova Scotia. I've spoke to many colleagues of mine, many people from different provinces that have the same problems we see here in Nova Scotia when it comes to affordable housing. And what people really need in this province is a strong commitment from this government to address the needs of what I would say our most vulnerable residents in the province are requiring, and that's safe, adequate, clean housing to bring up their families or to spend their golden years in. And I must say, since being elected and having the portfolio of housing, I'm amazed on how many of the needs of Nova Scotians who are in the situation of trying to depend on government to provide this necessity for them have gone really unanswered for many years. There's a lot of problems in this province, especially around our public stock. I think in the Nova Scotia Housing Development Corporation Business Plan 2005-2006, in there it even states, I think it's around 64% of our public housing is 25 years or older in this province. And I've gone to many of these dwellings throughout Nova Scotia as the housing critic, but I've been in them over the last 10 years in my former profession, Mr. Chair, and I must say, it's a scary sight at times. There's residents, there's public stock that the province owns that are in dire need of repair. Not only physical structure repair, but there's issues about mold, mildew, about air quality is a big one that I've heard a lot about, especially in some of our senior complexes throughout this province. A lot of them have been built back in, I think, the early 70s or mid-70s, and it's funny when these seniors come to me with their stories on how they feel and their health conditions when they're in living in the residence that they live in. These individuals tell that they go for a trip, they go away for a month, or they go visit another relative in another part of the country, or go down south if they're fortunate enough to have the revenue of that. And they tell me how they feel so much better when they get out of their seniors complexes, when they get out of the dwellings they're living in, and they realize how such an impact their environment has on their health. And I remember a story from one senior that told me he just went to visit his kids for the weekend over the Christmas holiday. He lived down in the Windsor area and went to Cape Breton for the weekend. And he couldn't believe, and it had been a few years since this senior had left that residence, and he couldn't believe the difference in his breathing. He did have some health issues pertaining to his respiratory system, but he said it was like I walked into a different planet, and it was amazing. He was in Cape Breton. But he said it was amazing to feel that he could breathe better. And it wasn't 2 days later when he returned home after his vacation that he realized that it would have to be his environment that are causing some of the problems he has. And that's just one of the stories, Mr. Chairman. I've witnessed and been told many over the last 18 months about the air quality and about the mold and the mildew that's seen in some of these residents. A lot of these buildings were built before the specs we see today in the building codes, where we need to provide air systems to ventilate each room. And I don't know if government is going to address those needs. I will get to those questions later on, hopefully, about maintenance and repair to some of the public stock in our province. But it just shows that, with the agreements we've seen signed in this affordable housing agreement with the federal government, that an emphasis is needed on repair to our public stock. And it's amazing to see the announcements that have gone out. I've been to many of the announcements with the minister and read a lot of the figures and the money and the number of units that the government of this province want to address with these affordable housing agreements. But the sad thing is if we left today and the minister and I walked out of this chamber and I asked him to take me to a new construction site for a new unit that was provided under this agreement, there's not that many, Mr. Chairman. And I know the minister will stand up and quote about all the subsidies that are coming for rent subsidies and the units they're going to address. But seriously, if we walked out of here, there'd be a dozen or 2 dozen units that we could go to. And That's not just an issue for us, Mr. Speaker. It's an issue throughout the country. When it comes to rent subsidies and the choice of government, especially our provincial government, the choice for them to really, I think, commit the majority of our commitment with the Affordable Housing Agreement to rent subsidies. And the Canadian Association of Housing Renewal and the University of Toronto researchers agreed that rent subsidies alone are not effective, and they must be paired with construction of more affordable housing units and an increase in public stock. The concern we have is with the announcements of several of the issues and several of the agreements and contracts that the government have announced over the last year or so, when it comes to rent subsidies, is with the private developers. We feel that this isn't going to benefit the people that are in need right now of affordable housing. It's not going to benefit the people tomorrow that's going to need affordable housing, and it definitely isn't going to affect the people in 10 years when the majority of these contracts mature, when they're in need of affordable housing. And that's where we and I, as housing critic, have many questions. Is about what are we going to do in 10 years? Is the commitment from this government on addressing affordable housing just a short-term solution? From all indications, from the agreements that we've seen, the contracts that the government has gone into, you might say, or the minister might say, that 10 years is a long-term commitment, but I don't think it is. When you look at if there's an individual who's today